it's appropriate. And we're recording. So no, it's great. So we're excited to be here for all of those reasons. And I'm not going to go into any more depth on that because we have some great presenters here that will cover why this is so important. So we're going to jump right into the meeting today, because really what we want to do today is get feedback and information from all of you. And we've set up the agenda very specifically to give a lot of time at the end of the presentations to allow for your questions and your feedback, and we're looking forward to getting that. So I also want to kind of note where we are in this project. So as I said, this is kind of the launching point. Today is the first chance for everybody to get a chance to weigh in on what the designs might look like. So today we're going to just take this initial feedback. And then from that, Met is going to go back and put some more plans onto paper. And once those plans are on paper, they're going to come back again and make sure that whatever gets onto paper is what was reflected in the meeting today. And then we do believe there'll be a third opportunity as well for folks to weigh in, as things get adjusted and the plans move forward. So that is the timeline of this. There's still plenty of time to weigh in. We're really excited that you're here to be able to provide that initial feedback. And it's the first stop. So please keep checking in with us and making sure that this moves in a way that's appropriate. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. That's what today is looking like. I'm going to jump into some housekeeping. But before I do that, we have some polls for you guys to take. So online, we're going to go ahead and launch those and get those going. In the room, you got a physical hard copy poll that it should be in your hands. We're just going to start off and, oh yeah, thank you for going and grabbing those. We're going to start off and just do that first page. So don't turn it over yet. We're just going to start with the first half of it. And you can fill that out while I'm going through these kind of housekeeping items, and then we'll jump into the presentation. So first I wanted to let you know, as the owl did, we are recording today. The main purpose of the recording is to make sure that we get all the notes and gather all the information. So we want to just make sure that everything gets captured at the end of today. We also recognize that there's an additional benefit in that if folks want to know about this project but weren't able to join us today, we do want them to be able to hear about it. So it will be posted on Met's website once they've had a chance to kind of go through it. So definitely folks, if you know folks that want to know more about this, you can connect them to the website. Also, we are asking that you hold questions till the end of our presentations. We have a number of folks that are going to explain, I think, most of the facets of this project. So you'll get probably most of your questions answered throughout the project or throughout the presentations. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've left ample time for questions. So your questions will definitely get answered. We want to hear them. So if you can hold those to the end, we appreciate that. But we don't want you to forget those questions. I tend to do that, kind of get into the next topic and forget about them. So please write them down. If you were in the room, we have comment cards. We would really prefer that you go ahead and fill out those comment cards again, so that we can hold on to those and make sure that those get captured in all of the notes. And if you were online, Julie is going to be capturing all of those. So just go ahead and put the questions whenever you want to into the chat. She'll tabulate those, and then when it's the appropriate time, we'll bring those forward. So please take time to write down those questions. We want to hear what you're thinking about or your comments too. The final thing that I want to note is that Met does have an RFP out right now for the farming part of this project. And so the Met folks are going to take a minute to talk about that in case folks have come for that specific reason. So you will hear about that. All right, so that is our meeting today. I get the pleasure of introducing the executive officer for the Delta Conservancy, the esteemed Campbell Ingram.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for everybody for showing up and participating. I want to give just kind of an overview of quickly the Delta Conservancy, but also our program, the Nature-Based Solutions Program, and talk about how happy we are to be partnered with the Metropolitan Water District and be able to help provide funding for this project, for a project that we think is really going to be transformative in the Delta, how we manage these deeply subsided islands. So just a quick word about the Delta Conservancy. We are a state agency. We serve the Delta and the Sassoon Marsh. We typically provide public dollars, bond fund, federal funding and grant funding to ecosystem restoration projects, economic development projects, climate resilience projects, and even some drought response projects as well. We have a voting board of 11 members, and 5 of whom are Delta County supervisors, 1 from each of the 5 Delta counties. Supervisor Diane Burgess is here with us today from Contra Costa County, and we very much appreciate her participation on our board. So that's our role. We bring resources to projects like this, and again, so really excited about this project means in the Delta. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about our nature-based solution project. And go ahead, next slide. But first, I want to do a little level setting about ecosystem or about subsidence in the Delta to begin. So that map right there, you can see the bright orange and the yellow zones. Basically, those are highly organic peat soils in the Delta. So those peat soils formed over 10,000 years as sea level rose and water filled in the Delta, and those wetland species basically kept pace with sea level rise by putting down below ground biomass, which formed into peat. Peat layers up to 150 feet thick. So a really amazing, resource. Peat soils are incredible for agriculture. And so when we discovered gold and you had San Francisco growing, this was sort of one of the first bread baskets of California. The thing is, though, that to be able to grow anything in peat soil, you have to drain it. Crops don't grow in saturated soils. So basically we reclaimed the islands, and then we cut drains that allowed us to, sorry, I got distracted by that allowed us to clear the root zone of water. So to grow a crop like corn, you need to, should I pause for a minute or
No.
are we still connected?
That's better. Sorry, it's there. They're not seeing
okay.
the map.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So again, we had to drain the islands. When you do that, to grow corn, you have to drain the island 36 to 48 inches deep. You have to aerate that root zone. And when you do that, you expose that entire soil column to oxygen, and the microbes in the peat soil digest the carbon in the soil in the peat, and their byproduct, their waste product is carbon, and it just vents into the atmosphere. So if I get away, can they still hear me online?
Yes.
Okay. So in this particular area here, these dark zones, that's about 150,000 acres in the Delta. A lot of this land is 20 to 30 feet below sea level. So they really are these massive bowls in the middle of the Delta. And they continue to emit carbon, they continue to subside at pretty significant rates. Peat soils are recognized globally. Drained peat soils for agriculture is tremendous carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And so we have our own little special situation here right here in California. This 150,000 acres puts out about 1.2 million tons of carbon every year into the atmosphere. To put that in context, the whole state of California has about 17 million arable acres of agriculture, plant-based agriculture. That 17 million acres naturally produces about 8 million tons of carbon. Goes directly into the atmosphere. This little 150,000 acre spot produces a little less than a quarter of that, 1.2 million tons. So you can picture this little region in the Delta really as a chimney that is just pumping carbon into the atmosphere really as fast and far as it can. And it continues to do that every year. So in these yellow zones, the more mineral edges, we see 3 to 5 tons per acre emitting. But in some of these dark red areas, we see up to 30 tons per acre. So we're losing about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of elevation per year. If you went out in this area and you scraped 1 inch off an entire acre and you weighed it, it would be approximately 10 to 15 to 20 tons. So that's what's happening every single year. Every 3 to 5 years, we lose another 5 or 6 inches. And so these are just enormous holes in the ground where carbon that is volatilized into the atmosphere and continues to do so at a really astounding rate. So that subsidence also fundamentally threatens those islands, all of the agriculture, all of the infrastructure on those islands. There are communities in and around these subsided islands that are threatened by that ever increasing head pressure on these levees. And then, of course, as we know, we've got the state and federal water projects here that pump water to Southern California, the East Bay, Central Coast, and all of San Joaquin Valley agriculture. So the fear is that if we were to lose the Western Delta and it become too salty to actually export water, we could have a significant interruption in water delivery and really, serious impact on California's overall economy if that were to happen, worst case scenario. Okay, so that's the background on subsidence and what it's all about. So what are we trying to do to combat that? Well, the beautiful thing is it's very simple. All you gotta do is put water back on the landscape. Put water back on that landscape, you stop that oxidation, you stop the subsidence, stop the carbon emissions, and you also can provide additional benefits of actually creating more habitat value. So our program is basically trying to incentivize landowners. We had some funding, we've pretty much allocated most of it, but put water back on the landscape. You can do rice cultivation, which keeps agriculture viable, and it's a higher commodity than most of what's grown in this region. You can do managed wetlands, you can do polluticulture, anything to put water back on the landscape and stop that oxidation is really what we're after. So that's essentially what our program is all about. The state recently released targets for natural and working lands, recognizing that the state will not be able to meet our climate objectives unless we do focus on all the natural and working lands throughout the state. So how do we better manage the forests, the grasslands, the coastal areas, the scrublands to reduce carbon emissions? We were within the Delta, there's now a 50,000 acre target expectation, trying to re-wet up to 50,000 acres between now and 2045 to try to achieve this objective of reducing subsidence. So in a perfect world, we would create the right incentives, the right market structures, and be able to have everyone wake up and say, hey, I can make more money farming carbon, putting water back on my landscape than continuing with the farming that causes the subsidence. One other quick thing to mention is that we do now have a protocol for the voluntary carbon market that allows a farmer to quantify their baseline emissions, what's naturally occurring based on their operations, and then describe their project, which if you put water back on the landscape, it'll stop this much carbon. You'll get some methane production, you'll get some below ground biomass, carbon sequestration. You calculate all that out, and then you can basically get that certified by a third party, and you can get certified credits, take it to the market and sell those credits on the market. And right now the credits are trading at about $20, $15 to $20 per ton or per credit. When we start to get closer to 25, 30, that's what we see as an inflection point where, agriculture of the Delta might say, hey, I can make more money than what we're making on carbon than what we're doing here. And rice, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is typically a higher value commodity. So we see a lot of things lining up here, a lot of great opportunity to really address this problem. You put water on the landscape, you increase habitat value as well. So there's just a wonderful opportunity. This project, I think, is just an absolute showcase. I think this is one where we're taking a whole island and we're going to try to put these practices into place, show that it's economically viable, more flood resistant, more climate resistant, provides habitat benefits. I mean, it's really an exciting project because it can really be transformative. And when the surrounding farmers are looking over the levee and seeing that that neighbor is doing this and it's economically viable and it's reducing their flood risk, then I think we'll have, greater uptake and more interest in people willing to do this. So it's very exciting. I just want to say too that over the course of, I've been working on this for about 15 years, and 15 years ago, you would have talked to Delta farmers about this and they would have said, I'm not worried about subsidence. It's happening. It's just a reality. The state typically comes in and fixes levees when they collapse. But over that 15-year period, we've seen a real transition. Farmers really starting to recognize that they're underwater and they've got these concerns and they're looking for alternatives. And they recognize that there's sustainability, not all farmers, but a majority of them. So we're starting to get a lot more interest in taking on these type of issues in the Delta. So I will wrap it up there. And I just did want to mention one more thing. Webb Tract is about 5,000 acres, right? Maybe 4,900, 4,800 will be restored. That's going to result in about 40, if just on the average of 10 tons of avoided emissions. That's going to result in almost 50,000 tons of avoided carbon emissions every year from once the restoration is complete moving forward. So that's pretty significant. You can calculate out the number of vehicles that is, but it's an amazing figure. So with that, I thank everyone for being here. Thank Matt again for the partnership and the willingness to take on this project, and I look forward to all of your feedback, and thank you again. Melinda Salvi from Metropolitan Water District is coming up next. She's going to provide it.
Move that a little bit into the middle of the screen there. Oops, excuse me. He's way taller than I am. So actually, Campbell kind of took my thunder there and pretty much told you everything that I was going to say. But just to recap a little bit, I'm Melinda Stalvey. I'm a senior environmental specialist with Metropolitan Water District and the project manager for the Webb Tract project. I was lucky enough to come into our Bay Delta group at a pretty pivotal time in our organization's history. And I was able to submit a grant application, which was ultimately, as Campbell said, funded by the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. And we're really grateful for this opportunity to be able to do some really amazing things in the Deltas, hopefully some really amazing things in the Delta. As Campbell mentioned, Webb Tract is a 5,498 acre island located in the central Delta region. Metropolitan purchased this island and 3 other islands back in 2016. They actually had a 5-island purchase, which we've since we've sold one of those islands. So we have 4 islands left, and Webb Tract is one of those. Webb Tract is unique in all of the islands because it is not accessible by a road. It is only accessible by ferry. So it provides some really unique opportunities that some of the other islands don't. And there's some very unique challenges that go along with Webb Tract as well. It has, in the past, it's been farmed mostly corn up until 2021, I think was the last crop that we had in corn. When Metropolitan purchased the islands in 2016, I think everybody knows that there was another iteration of the Delta Conveyance Project. It's now called the Delta Conveyance Project. Back then, it was a different title. They were looking to potentially build tunnels through the Delta region, and there was an opportunity for one of those islands to potentially be used as a tunnel shaft, and perhaps for some of the other islands to be used for other maybe putting tunnel muck or something is my understanding. That has since changed. The new governor came into the office when Governor Brown went out, and Governor Newsom then asked them to go back to the drawing board, and they've since done that. And the new alignment for the Delta Conveyance Project does not go through the Delta any longer. And these islands now, Metropolitan owns 4 islands that are we had this challenge of what should we do with the islands at this point in time. I can tell you, so with this grant application, we were looking at how can we make some real changes in the Delta and still protect the freshwater pathway, what we term the freshwater pathway, which is a lot of the water that flows through the Delta region still will reach the pumps, but also is really important and vital to the health of the Delta region and the water supply in general. So with that, we were looking for ways that we could make some changes in the Delta. I mentioned that the Webb Tract is it's uniquely situated so that it's very difficult. It has some unique challenges to it. And one of those, when you're farming, is being able to get your product off of the island because you can only do that by ferry, and you're really tied by how often that ferry runs and being able to get the product off the island. It has some significant challenges to it. Also, getting equipment there, being able to manage for fire danger, things like that are also very tough. Campbell mentioned that there's some significant erosion in the Delta region that has caused subsidence. Webb Tract is anywhere between 12 and 24 feet below sea level in different spots. And what we have found is that over the years that there has been significant changes in the actual island itself as that erosion happens, where we get a lot of areas that are too wet to farm. It's because the peat soils have been eroded so much that we start to get water that comes up from the bottom, and it makes it very difficult for any kind of agriculture partners to farm because their equipment gets stuck, and so it's changing. And so we were looking at ways that we could change that project. So we submitted a grant application, and with the goals to reduce or reverse subsidence by the actions that we're going to be doing. By providing a sustainable agriculture and seeing if there's an opportunity to do a sustainable agriculture crop that is going to reverse subsidence, that has the same, that meets the goals of reversing subsidence or stopping subsidence on the island and stopping those greenhouse gas emissions that Campbell talked about. We would really like to see some habitat restoration on the project and be able to see some of the habitat that has been shrinking dramatically in all across the state of California, but particularly in the Delta region, being able to restore some of that habitat and provide some recreational benefits, study opportunities, and opportunities for education. And then Campbell mentioned the carbon sequestration. So I'll go into the next slide with the project itself. We created a short video that I'm going to show. It's about 3 minutes long, 3 minutes and 40 seconds long, but I'll show that really quick and then go on to the next slide.
Webb Tract has been farmed for decades in the Sacramento Delta region. As they plant row crops, the soil, the rich peat soil, it oxidizes over time. And over the decades, we've lost elevation, and that causes subsidence on the Delta Islands. We were awarded a $20.9 million grant from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy to build 2 separate projects on Webb Tract. For the rice project, our objective is to create sustainable agriculture on the island, something that is profitable and will help to maintain the island, but will also make it so that we don't erode the soils any farther. So it will wet soils and allow us to be able to create a sustainable product that we can sell on the market. The second is to build up to 3,500 acres of wetland on the island. The wetland will hopefully, with the biomass that's created through the cattails and for the tules that are going to grow, they'll eventually lay down over time and will help us to not just stop subsidence, but reverse it, which is how these Delta Islands were formed in the first place. In addition, we're hoping to create habitat, which will support some of the migratory birds in the Delta region, the recreational benefits associated with the islands, some educational benefits, and partnering with ecocultural experts in the region to help bring some tribal knowledge to management and maintenance of the islands. The grant was funded under a program called the Nature-Based Solutions Program.
The overall goals of the Nature-Based Solutions Program is really to target the 150,000 acres in the Delta that continues to subside all the time, creating huge carbon emissions and threatening the state's water supply. We hope to accomplish just a great demonstration project that anyone in the Delta can see, a 5,000 acre island that's been put into a mosaic of managed wetland and rice, stops subsidence, stops carbon emissions, but also has enough ag revenue, enough revenue from the carbon market to maintain the levees and keep the island viable to the future.
It's very expensive to keep those levees up, which protect the island. By doing a sustainable agricultural product like rice on the island, we're hoping to be able to generate enough revenue that will help to pay for the maintenance costs on the island and the upkeep of the levees. So some of the research opportunities that we have are to study how we can manage the water across the islands to maximize phytoplankton and zooplankton production, which could be used as fish food that can then be exported off the island to help the local ecosystems. Conditions in the Delta and in California in general have created water supply issues. So if we can study how we can reuse water, how we can manage the water and recirculate it, we can reduce water flow across the island as well. I'd really like to thank the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy for providing us this grant opportunity, which will develop these 2 very important projects for the Delta region. We're really excited about our opportunities to be able to partner with Delta interests, to be able to generate a project that will bring so much new information to the Delta, and that will be able to transfer some of this knowledge to local landowners as well.
I'd like to add appreciation for Metropolitan Water District being really in the forefront of this, willing to take the risks to look at how we manage Delta Islands into the future so that we can maintain them into the future. It's that kind of partnership that's really critical.
If we can show that this is that we can generate revenue enough for us to be able to make this a revenue positive, we'll be able to show local landowners that this is possible on their islands as well.
So one of the really important parts of this project is, as Campbell mentioned, is that how do we make this a financially viable option for Metropolitan and for any of the owners that we could export this knowledge to? And he mentioned the agriculture. So a part of this grant is to develop agriculture on the property, but also to develop the wetlands and the carbon sequestration opportunities that we could then sell credits on the market to be able to help maintain the costs associated with maintenance of the island, but also the levees. The levees are a very expensive portion of taking care of any of these islands in the Delta region. And so if we can show that we can reverse subsidence and offset some of the costs associated with that, this will be really important for the Delta region. Campbell mentioned that there is the voluntary market that is available now with a protocol that has been developed for the voluntary market. And we're hopeful that in the next coming years that there will also be a protocol that will be adopted that will allow us to enter into a regulatory market as well. And the regulatory market credits actually sell for substantially more than the voluntary market. But we'll be able to see whether or not opportunities like that, like ours on this island and others in the Delta, will be able to take advantage of those opportunities in the future. Next slide, please. So we mentioned that we have the rice project. The rice is, we've identified about 1,398 acres of land on the Delta that is not subsided and that is not too wet to farm. We released a request for proposals for interested farmers. We did significant outreach with local associations prior to releasing the RFP to let them know that it was coming and to let everybody know so that we could get as much interest in this as possible. We did require that there was a mandatory site visit at the island, and that is because it is such a difficult place to get to, and we wanted anybody to know what they were getting into when they were out on the islands. And so we offered that opportunity in late June. And the submission deadline is going to be August 2nd. So if anybody has any questions, please reach out. There's contact information for me at the end of the presentation, but we're hoping to go to our board in November. That's what the target that we're shooting for, to be able to execute a lease agreement with the farmer, and then go back to the Delta Conservancy probably in January at their board to enter into phase 2 of the agreement. The grant funded some money for the farmers to help them to be able to offset the cost of converting what was the existing agriculture into rice. And so that's part of the RFP as well, is to help the farmers to be able to develop these really important projects like this on this island. And so we're offering, I think it's somewhere around $900, $875, $900 per acre to help them offset some of the cost. Okay, and so that's a little overview of the wetlands and the rice project. I'm going to get a little bit more. Well, Jennifer, I'm going to introduce Jennifer, who's part of our engineering consulting team, and she's going to discuss a little bit about the wetlands project and some of the challenges that we faced and some of the things that we're looking at. And after that, I will meet with, or I'll have Don Hankins speak. He is part of our ecocultural group. We're really interested in this project and being able to not only get the feedback from the public like we're doing today, but also to partner with indigenous cultures and in the area to see how we can incorporate some of the management strategies that they have, some ideas potentially for agriculture, and how we can incorporate some of that on this island as well. So we really got a big palette of things that we're looking at, and so I'm excited to share that with you today.
So I'm Jennifer Bird. I'm a senior restoration ecologist with GEI Consultants, and I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the considerations relating to the wetlands design and planning, which is currently underway. The restoration goals for the are many for this project. The first one is to restore high quality habitat for a diverse array of native species, along with the subsidence reversal and carbon emissions reduction and sequestration goals that Campbell and Melinda have already discussed. We want to set them up to study how these managed wetlands can augment the local estuarine food web via exporting zooplankton-rich waters into local waterways, and integrate indigenous ecocultural uses and values into the project. Next. So I don't think I really need to spend much time on this because Campbell did already, but I think it's important. It's good. It's important for everybody to understand how the subsidence occurred so that we understand how to reverse it, right? So that air exposure early in the subsidence process, after the islands were reclaimed, compaction and wind erosion and burning had greater, they were more prevalent as factors in the rates of subsidence. But today, the vast majority of subsidence is caused by that microbial oxidation or decomposition of the peat. And so, as has been mentioned, re-wetting peat soil halts that subsidence while restoring marsh reverses it. Next. So, hey, can you move that little window out of the way a little bit? So So essentially the way marsh reverses subsidence is by rebuilding peat soil, because they're very productive. And this is a main target for this project, is to restore as much acreage of shallowly flooded wetlands that support dense and productive stands of tules and cattails. These would be impounded wetlands with managed water levels. They're such productive ecosystems, and they put out so much vegetative and root growth every year. And because it's an anoxic condition with that shallow inundation, that biomass that they're creating every year is not breaking down, and it's building up upon itself and creating essentially newly formed peat. And that can increase land elevations by, on average, 3 centimeters a year up to, or a foot a decade. But it's been shown in some really productive wetlands to be 3 times that fast. So locally, so it's really notable for that reason, and it's the best way to reverse subsidence that we know of in these delta locations. And in addition to eliminating those emissions from the oxidation, it's also putting so much carbon back into the soil, into the wetland vegetation. So it's one of the best land uses for greenhouse gas emissions reduction that we have in the Delta. Next. So there's a number of functional wetland and aquatic habitat types that may be restored on Webb Tract. So the permanently flooded wetlands, and which are the tule, cattail, and midget marsh I've just been talking about. Those have like a lot of habitat benefits. They support a lot of special status sensitive species like giant garter snake and western pond turtle and tricolored blackbird and others. They also support migratory birds on the Pacific flyway, waterfowl, and many other native species. They have a lot of recreational opportunities afforded, so bird watching and duck hunting. And tules and cattails have a lot of ecocultural uses as well. Within the marshes, we would have some pockets of open waters, ponds or channels, and that creates habitat diversity, which adds habitat value for a lot of species. But open water, while it halts subsidence, doesn't reverse it, and you don't have the same net carbon emissions reduction benefits in open water as you do with marsh. However, floating peat wetlands can be placed in open water areas to increase those habitat and carbon and subsidence values, and those are being trialed experimentally on Bolden Island, just east of Webb Tract. And that's essentially where you have marsh vegetation growing on peat, and you harvest a block of that peat with the vegetation and place it in water where it floats indefinitely, and accretes biomass both vertically down into the water column and laterally to increase in area. And by doing so, it has really high subsidence reversal potential, because eventually it can get rooted and be building up from there as a rooted marsh, and also high carbon sequestration benefits. And then finally, seasonal or transitional wetlands are those that are not inundated or saturated all the time. And so whenever those are dry, they are continuing to oxidize and subside and emit carbon with that oxidation, but not to the same extent as drain root zone farming like corn or alfalfa. So we will have, these aren't a target habitat restoration goal in terms of acreage for this site, but they would be restored at the periphery of these managed wetlands, and where we have topographic heterogeneity and areas of high ground within the wetlands. You would naturally have some seasonal wetlands being restored, and that could be things like willow scrub or wet meadow. And there are also a number of invasive plants that like seasonal wetlands, like Himalayan blackberry and pampas grass. So that's a management aspect. But also because we're reversing subsidence within these units, as the land accretes over time, we would be raising the water levels to continue that subsidence reversal process. So some of those seasonal wetlands would be gradually transitioning into that emergent marsh habitat over the decades. Next slide. And then Campbell briefly mentioned polluticulture. So polluticulture is basically farming wetlands or farming within wetlands. And we are also looking into designing some of the managed wetlands fields to allow for equipment access for occasional harvesting of above ground material, essentially haying, tules, and cattails, because those products can be used to create many sustainable products, and they've been shown to do so elsewhere in Europe, and they're being trialed in Canada and Minnesota. And so it's an issue of getting like local markets developed for these things, but it's a really promising potential agricultural approach in these Delta Islands. And so this would be above ground harvest, so the roots are left intact and the marshes regrow really fast, and it's actually like a very productive growth that would happen afterwards. And so really designing for that would just be putting subfields into where that's like part of the expected management and that there's access for that equipment. Next. There's a number of design considerations and constraints that we're dealing with as we work on the design plan. One of them is that we're restoring these wetlands around the periphery of the areas that have been allocated for rice farming, which are shown in magenta on this map. And we're also looking to preserve and avoid some riparian habitats that are existing on the tract, as well as a lot of infrastructure. So a lot of drainage, the drainage systems, interior access roads, tow drain canals, et cetera. And we're doing that and trying to avoid impacts to those things while designing for accommodating that subsidence reversal. So we're expecting the land elevations to increase within these managed wetland cells, the water levels to go up with them intentionally. And so that's a complication of the design when you're looking at this really large area. And we also have pretty high topographic relief on this tract compared for many central Delta Islands. You could see, especially in that southwest corner, we have a lot of high ground and relief. A lot of that is inorganic soils that haven't been subsiding the same as the peat. Then some of it might just be like differences in how the lands have been managed and farmed over the decades. But it's hard to shallowly inundate really large areas when you have that high amount of topographic relief without doing mass leveling or grading, which we don't intend to do for the most part in this project. Even if we wanted to, we wouldn't have the budget for it. But also those areas of high ground are they're sensitive habitats that can support rare plants and that may have cultural significance as well. And then, but I guess as I'm talking about that topographic relief, we do want to prioritize early inundation of the remaining peat soils on the tract. And so some of our design approaches have been looking at that, trying to get the peat that is still present on the tract inundated earliest in the planning timeframe to start to immediately mitigate that subsidence that's ongoing and the greenhouse gas emissions. And that tends to be on the areas of lower ground as it is. So that's helpful from a design consideration. And then the final constraint that I have listed here, among others I have not, is how the tract is only accessible by ferry. That does complicate implementation of it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dawn to talk about the ecocultural working group. Dawn Hinkins. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out today. Don Hankins, I'm Miwok from the Delta area, and I'm part of the Ecocultural Restoration Working Group. Austin Stevenon, who's also joined us today, is also part of the group, and our other working group members are listed here. Our working group is made up of people from our tribal communities surrounding the Delta and including the Delta. And all of our working group people are not necessarily representing tribal governments, but working with as traditional cultural practitioners who have knowledge of how to steward these landscapes and have experience in doing that work. And that's the process of how we kind of form the organization of our working group. Next slide. When we think about ecocultural restoration, it's a term that many people are probably not familiar with. And I'm really excited that Metwater approached me a few years back to think about how to integrate this idea of ecocultural restoration into the Delta Islands project. When was that? Back in 2021 timeframe. And I think it was a real eye opener to the team of folks working on that project that ultimately worked to do the kind of planning scheme for Bolden Island and then rolling it forward to this project. What ecocultural restoration is pretty complex. It is something that obviously is integrating indigenous knowledge that's specific to our place. So globally we look at the benefits of indigenous stewardship, looking at climate resilience, biodiversity, stewardship, those sorts of things, and cultural maintenance are all part of those processes, but it's ultimately based on a knowledge of place, living in place for many thousands of years. And as we say, since time immemorial. For our process, it begins by looking at the physical environment. It begins with understanding which species occur within place, and then also thinking about what are the cultural attributes. And when I say cultural attributes, I think about, not only the species that are growing out, out in the Delta, but also the stories that are associated with those places and the interconnection between those sorts of things. And it's a really complex system that it's not something we're divulging out to the broader group, but it's something that internally our group understands that informs the work that we do. So it's a little bit hard to understand that sometimes. But what it does is that this process ultimately seeks to prioritize Indigenous stewardship within place. So what does Indigenous stewardship look like? It might include fire, it might include, coming out and harvesting plants, and other sorts of stewardship activities. And all of these things are process-based. We think about Indigenous stewardship with fire as an example, and it's fire as a process, and we as humans are putting fire into that place to help to steward it. And by doing so, given the impacts of European settlement and the formation of the state and the removal of our Indigenous peoples from this region, this actually helps to change the future of that so that we can reconnect with landscapes and have those kind of connections again. The map on the far side there is illustrating an example of what the ecocultural framework looks like in terms of the geographic place. This is looking at Mucol or Plains Miwok homelands and the storyscape that's around it, linked to a specific ecosystem. And the ecosystem that's being illustrated here is vernal pools. So, when we think about different ecosystem types, there's a lot of different ecosystem types, obviously, within the Delta. Each of them has an ecocultural connection. Next slide, please. In terms of the framework of the Delta Islands and the Webb Tract project, thinking of that framework in Austin and I's work with Webb Tract or with Bolden Island, what we found is that in terms of framing how that project works and the process works, is that it's ultimately seeking to enable Indigenous ecocultural practices of stewardship and revitalization of those things through different criteria. Restoration is one element of that, being able to make sure that the plants are there, that there's resilience to the system, and it's a long-term process. For us, thinking about it, we're not thinking necessarily in terms of the project timeline for implementing this project, but what it means, 200 years down the road and 500 years down the road. That's the way that we tend to think about things. And so there's a lot of elements that come into it. But the beauty of it is, as we think about the previous presenters sharing, the discussions around greenhouse gas emissions reduction and opportunities for agriculture and all those sorts of things, they all ultimately hub under ecocultural restoration. We think about water quality, we think about carbon stewardship, all those things are ultimately available for us within that ecocultural framework. Next slide, please. So that ecocultural web, that thing that centers around our cultures, is based on our relationship with the environment. It's centered on our relationship with species. And when we think about those species, from our perspective, we also think about species that are no longer present within the Delta, like grizzly bears. They also were a process. They were a top predator, just like we are also a top predator within the system, at least historically, and maybe at some point we can be back in that place again. And maybe some time, the work that's done at Webb Tract also provides a space for grizzlies to be back in this place again, with all those different things that are interconnected. But we see the connection of a lot of different species that maybe for a lot of folks maybe doesn't make sense. Like, why is condor included in here, and why are whales included in here? From our perspective and our story, they are ultimately the foundation of the food web for the Delta. And so when we think about what the outcomes of the project is, whatever we do ultimately leads to something better for those species as well. And that also then expands upon the idea of what is the Delta. For us, we see it as something that connects the marine environment to the crest of the Sierras and beyond. And so it's a really complex system that's built in here. Next slide. So in terms of the general process of the way that our ecocultural group works, is that not only are we bringing our cultural knowledge of species and our stories and understanding of this landscape in, but also going back and validating that knowledge by looking at what the landscape itself tells us. How do we read the landscape to tell us what that restoration process might look like and how it might change design elements? So for me, I like to look at soils as one of the beginning places of understanding how what the potential of a specific place might be within the delta. Go to the next slide, please. From those soils, we can also then think about how it validates our knowledge of ecosystems that would have traditionally been known in this place. It's been highly altered, knowing that there were village sites in and around the areas of these islands. The nearest village and this island itself was in the language area of the village of Weepa. And so, when we think about, okay, if there's a village in this area, what do people need to survive? And so in thinking about that, it includes, the food plants, medicinal plants, and the habitats for the species that people need to be able to live in a place. And so through looking at soils, we're able to combine that process to understand which ecosystems are here. On this 1939 image from Webb Tract, the bulk of the island, which is not colored in polygons, is a mix of floodplain grasslands, sedges, tules, and scattered shrubs. However, there are areas where the soils tell us that there's a greater association of certain plant communities that are found there that I've highlighted on the map. They include things like sand dunes and transitional habitats, areas where there's alkaline soils, where salt grass and salt-loving shrubs would be found, which are culturally important to us as well. And so there's a lot of different things that are part of it. But the other thing that we're able to look at through this is also then understanding where historic sloughs were located at within this landscape. And obviously the landscape's been changed quite a bit, but those sloughs would have been important for feeding that food web in the past, and potentially are a conduit for restoring and reversing subsidence into the future. So I'll go through the next couple of slides here to kind of wrap it up. So this is I think it was 2017 imagery that shows not only the past vegetation communities that would have been found in these places and their associations, but what I found really interesting, and I just put this together, so this is new to like everybody in our working groups here, is that as we advance to the next slide, that with the flooding that shows the black waters during the flood period in the springtime, the high ground happens to mostly be associated with where the old sloughs were located at on the island. And so potentially, as we think about, these sloughs as being the ways that water enters onto the island, and also is saturated and has retained less subsidence in the past, potentially this is a way to bring water back into the island and to rehabilitate it in some respect to some of these systems that we're looking at. So that this is something that will be continuing to advance, but it's a way of kind of bridging together to start to understand, well, okay, what's the next opportunities for us to think about the connection between certain species, what's missing from this place. There's a lot of native species that are still here. There's a lot of invasive species that are still here. But as we start to think about the stewardship and working with what nature has left us in this place, I think there's a lot of really cool opportunities that are there for us. So with that, I think that kind of wraps up my ecocultural discussion. But as we think about the future, this is an example of one of those kind of future potential future outcomes, which, in my opinion, illustrates the kind of extent of different ecosystems on Webb Tract. And this happens to be at the Pacific Preserve, which is much further east. But some of those plants that are used in, say, culture that was talked about, tules, cattails, in the foreground and in this nice little green that kind of covers a lot of the slide, is tule potato, which is a culturally important plant, which we could potentially be restoring and utilizing within the Delta, and also integrating it back into our diets again. In the distance we see the riparian forest, so it's a mix of these different things that are part of this rich landscape, and supports the local species as part of it. So with that, I'll turn it back to Melinda to cover the remainder of today.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
What's really unique and important about what Dom was talking about for me is that when he said that we're looking at what's left. And instead of looking backwards at what was, he's looking forwards at what could be, what's the here now, and how can we move this forward into the future and use this as a palette that we have now and create something from where we are at this point in time. And I find that really refreshing because a lot of times we do find that when people talk, it's about the past, it's about where we've been. And while that informs the future, we really have this place that we can start at right now with what we have. And so I'm really excited about the opportunities that that brings. And, you know, bringing the public meeting here today, we brought the tribal partnership with us, but this public meeting is really about bringing in the public and hearing about what the public has to say about this project, but also ideas or things that we may not have thought of ourselves. We have a pretty broad array of people who are here today that work with us as partners. Our environmental planning staff are here, our engineering staff, CBEC, GEI, associates, ESA is our tribal folks. We've even got some agricultural folks who from the islands here today. But this is an opportunity for us to be able to explain some of this project to the public, and then hopefully to be able to get some feedback from you. Some of the things I just really wanted to touch on really quickly, and then I'll put up my contact information so that you know, we'd love to hear from you in the chat today or for comments and any kind of questions that you have. But also, if you feel that you can reach out to me through my contacts, and I would love to hear from you ideas, things that we might not have thought about, because in my experience, it takes a village. And that part of the process is really important to me, especially on a large project like this, is being able to hear and incorporate so many different ideas and really get something that is a much better project than if we were just trying to do this in a silo. So some of the, we mentioned just briefly is some of the things that we'd like to study. We have funding in this grant opportunity that's to help us look at some of the food web opportunities. That is looking at how can we manage the wetlands such that we could potentially manage the water to encourage phytoplankton and zooplankton production. Somebody mentioned that earlier. That could potentially be exported off the island and into the surrounding river systems to be able to supplant the food web and hopefully some of the starved fish that are in the region or in the rivers themselves to be able to provide some more opportunities for something there. We are looking at water management techniques. Is it possible for us to take some of that water from the rice fields and then manage that by putting it into the wetlands to reduce the water flow across the islands? Are there ways to hold water for longer and then release it, or maybe even backwards, going from the wetlands to the rice? That is something that we're looking at on a larger scale, and also we'll be studying. We have just recently, last week, we installed 2 eddy covariance stations on the islands, one that will be centered where the rice is expected to go, and one where the wetlands is expected to go. That's going to be measuring the background greenhouse gas emissions, water temperature, soil information, and then we'll be able to use that to compare once we've got these wetlands constructed and the rice constructed about what are the changes on the island and what kind of carbon are we actually being able to capture and reduce that was coming off the island previously. There's some recreational opportunities that we're also hoping to achieve with waterfowl hunting, bird watching, and then some educational opportunities that I would like to see us explore, because this does give us such a palette for us to be able to use this to be able to teach future generations about what's possible. And really, that's what this the Delta Conservancy has given us this opportunity to do, is to see what's possible in the Delta region. So super excited to be a part of this and to be able to be here today to present this to you. We look forward to we'll take the comments in, and we're moving forward with the design process, as Jennifer outlined a little bit, and then as we get a little bit further in the design process, we will have another public meeting again to let people know where we're at and what that design looks like. I really want to thank Campbell and the Delta Conservancy for this opportunity. It was a huge grant that was given to Metropolitan, and we're very proud to be a partner with them and the surrounding community to be able to do something different in the Delta, and hopefully to be able to show that this can be done on some of the other islands as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Karen for moderating the comments, but thank you all for being here today.
Right, fantastic. We have a few brave souls that have already turned in their comment cards. Please keep them coming. Online, please keep putting them in the chat and we'll get through all your questions and comments today. So we'll start off on that same note. The first question is about whether or not we'll be able to provide technical assistance and the applicability of the work that's being done here. So basically, are we going to be available to take this work and put it on other islands and help other folks implement these practices? And the answer with that is yes. That's the entire purpose of this project, is to be able to do a test run. We know that Met is not necessarily reliant on the income coming off of their land. So being able to do this in a place where there's not as much risk is going to be really important to then be able to really transfer this to farmers that may be a little bit more dependent upon what's coming off their islands. So that's the entire purpose. In addition to that, the Conservancy has also funded the Nature Conservancy to do some of this work as well. And there's specific funding put into that grant to be able to work with farmers to be able to pay for those transitions to rice and restoration. So we'll also be working through that project as well to transfer that knowledge on to other folks that might be interested. So anyone want to add to that, or is that?
Just that we've put in some grant applications for additional funding to be able to continue to support this type of work moving forward. So we're hopeful that this is something that we can continue.
Okay, the second question, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question without doing prefer that?
If you could write it down, that'd be great. Yeah, we'd appreciate it.
That's what the people online.
Yeah. And then we'll circle around at the end if there's folks that just really don't want to put it on paper. We won't be stubborn. All right, so the second question, I don't actually know the answer to. Can I visit Webb Tract by boat? So is the public allowed to come out to the island?
No,
I promise I'll do a really good story for you.
we would ask that you would contact Metropolitan staff before. We need to have somebody on with somebody on the island, but you definitely can contact me, Russ Ryan, who is our islands manager. Russ Ryan, he's in the audience today. You can contact me and I'll forward you and make sure that we're able to provide any opportunities if it's available. It's not a publicly accessible island at this point in time, but once we get the construction done, we'll be revisiting that as part of the project.
And major reasons for safety and security. I mean, these islands are subsided, there can be emergencies, we've had fires in the past. We recently, October 18th, had an earthquake, so we want to make sure we know where the people are.
And I'm not sure if everybody heard that online, if they were able to, if it captured Russ, but mostly because it's not accessible by road, it presents some dangers associated with it, whether it be from flood, levee failure, earthquake, or it's just somebody getting hurt on the island and not being able to be accessible. We need to know that there's people out there and when they're out there so that we can make sure that that people are safe. But definitely contact us if there's interest in seeing the island.
All right, great, thank you. Next, someone is interested in understanding how workforce will be created or how you guys are thinking about workforce as part of this. So developing the industry to kind of support this work. I know it's a big question.
That is a really good question.
Well, I guess sort of a couple of ways. I mean, the expectation is that you're continuing agriculture, you're getting a rice lessee to come in and grow rice that provides cascading effects of economic revenue through the agricultural sector. The work of all the consultants and the people actually doing the design work. But once the farming is in place and the wetlands in place, it will require some level of ongoing maintenance. I don't know what Met's expectation is for.
We will have a RFP, a separate RFP, will go out for ongoing maintenance on the island. And then we will continue to be doing research on the island as well. So there will be research opportunities. Hopefully we'll be able to garner more grants through but Metropolitan is really big on research. So there'll be opportunities for that. One of the things also that was touched on is this idea of polluticulture. And, you know, as we're trying to find ways for us to be able to make this, this island self-sustaining, economically self-sustaining, because like I mentioned just briefly, the levee maintenance is very expensive on the island. And so just being able to generate enough revenue to be able to make this even, break even is pretty difficult. So one of the things that we'll be looking at are there opportunities for polluticulture, or can we work with other interests in the region to be able to develop opportunities where polluticulture could be used in the region as well? They don't necessarily exist, at least not in any kind of big shape right now, but that doesn't mean that there's not something that we could develop into the future. Using materials for insulation that could be harvested and then used for insulation, or different kinds of food crops, things like that, that we might not necessarily know about right now, but that we would like to be able to study in the future. So
Just add one more thing. There's a tremendous amount of rice straw and above ground vegetation that it's helpful to actually remove the above ground biomass of a wetland periodically every 3 to 5 years, stimulates the growth of that wetland. And you've got rice straw every year. There are people out there looking for those type of waste streams to be able to turn them into other usable products, biofuels, biochar, proteins. And so that's something we're looking at in the Delta in general, to see if we can connect those type of resources with those type of facilities.
And I'll add one more thing in case it's not beating a dead horse, but our friends, our partners at Restore the Delta have also been thinking through this and thinking about how to really develop that next workforce. So as part of our proposals that we put forward for future funding, it does think about that work stream of how do we take populations that maybe don't have job opportunities or in underrepresented areas, give them the skills that they need to come out and help with this kind of newer farming and these kind of transitions in farm agriculture, and create that workforce from the surrounding communities to be able to come out into the Delta and do that work. So I think, you know, we mentioned at the beginning, this is a new thing as we're implementing this. I think it's going to take us some time to think through what are the actual needs, where can we find those needs, and then create that program to move it forward. So we're grateful that Met's taking on the the kind of guinea pig of this. So thank you. The next question is, how are youth going to be engaged?
that's a really good question. I would love to see us be able to prepare and develop an educational opportunities for the youth in the region, in the schools. I have just personally, I have a very good friend who works in Lodi, who is a teacher in Lodi, and we've been having discussions about how we could, once these wetlands are built, what are some of the opportunities that we could do to have children or youth come out and be able to learn from these islands. On some of our other islands, on Bolden Island, we're looking at the possibility of building a training center or a center of some kind, and then using some of those lands that we have out there to be doing agriculture, looking at different types of agriculture, small plots of land that we could then be showing and engaging the youth in the newest forms of agriculture in the region as well. So it's something that at least for me, is very important to me, that we are able to give back to the community and to be able to train the next people who are coming up, so that we can provide opportunities for them as well. I'm not going to be around forever, and so I would really like to see some people who are as interested in this as I am, and as many of you are as well. So
What's the overall timeline for the project?
this is a really fast-paced project. So the grant itself was a 3-year grant, and I believe that we may have actually gotten an extension for 5 years total, but the grant itself was design, permitting, environmental planning, permitting, and construction within 3 years. And then we'll have time for us to be able to be doing the research on the back end. So I mentioned the food web studies that were funded through the grant, but also the carbon sequestration, and then monitoring the growth of the wetlands, things like that. So that'll be the final 2 years of the grant is doing the monitoring and the studies that we'll be doing. Very fast, very fast.
Okay, and then the final comment card that I have is, is it possible to build a native plant nursery as part of this project?
Anything is possible. Anything is possible. And certainly if it's something that we know about in the design process, I know our ecocultural group is really interested in being able to bring back some of the native plants in the region, and being able to put make opportunities or have opportunities that we can use native plants on the island itself. Will it turn into a native plant farm? That's I mean, that I don't know, but it's certainly part of the process for us to be able to return some of the native plants to the region. Or encourage native plants. I shouldn't say return. I
Do you
should
wanna
say
ask
encourage.
John
Yeah.
to.
Don, do you wanna
Ask his question.
Do you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Speak loudly.
You mentioned there might be some additional future funding. The ongoing maintenance of the permanent wetlands could be quite expensive. Yes, it's such rich and wonderfully prolific property. But things can grow very quickly and you need to maintain the water distribution system and such. My specific questions, do you anticipate that any of this initial grant or future funding that was suggested might be available? Will any of that be available for the ongoing maintenance for the permanent wetlands?
Okay, so the question is, will there be future funding available for ongoing maintenance, given that it will be expensive to maintain this island?
So the initial answer is no. The funding that we received was for the design and construction of the project itself, and then some studies that we would be doing. So Metropolitan will be shouldering the burden of the maintenance on the island. We're hoping that the work that we're going to be doing with the carbon sequestration and any kind of polluticulture, the rice and what have you, will generate enough income on the island for us to be able to cover the costs of all of the maintenance. And that's, part of the important work that we're doing here is to show that we can do that.
Do we have more questions online? Okay, we've got one coming. Anyone else in the audience that has a question in the room?
So I'm gonna read it out loud.
Okay, we'll get to you next. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Are you also incorporating levee resilience as part of the project or studying that element?
Okay, so are we studying or incorporating levee resilience?
We have, as part of our study after the fact, we have a study on the subsidence reversal effects on the levee systems, whether or not it reduces pressure on the levees after the wetlands are built. But the levee maintenance itself, we actually have a Metropolitan has a separate program that is that does levee maintenance on all the programs, and we're looking at a lot of different ways to build the levees up to make them stronger. But that's a separate program completely. Russ, right?
Let me add to that. So what we presented, I actually just presented it to our board this past Monday, is a levee modernization. So a plan that allows to make the levee higher and wider to allow resiliency against the risk, and it reduces the risk to the levee for levee failures into the future.
So I'm gonna hopefully get that. So Met is proposing potentially doing a levee modernization program that'll help to make them more resilient.
That's pretty good.
All right, yeah, in the room.
Yes, my question was for Don, just for clarification. I was intrigued by the idea that the old sloughs were less subsided, and you mentioned the idea of a way to bring water back on, or I'm just intrigued by that. Can you clarify a little bit how that?
And Don, why don't you come use the microphone so folks can hear it?
So the question was about the old sloughs that we mapped out. Keep in mind, like, that was just mapped out this weekend, so we haven't had time to digest it fully, but the idea is that, and I think if we can use Bolden as an example of this, so Bolden has at least one large slough that still, while it's not tidal, allows for water to come onto the island. And on that project, we talked about potentially using that as a conduit to siphon water off the McCollum River in that case, onto the island to allow for water to percolate off into adjacent fields. Then once those fields are saturated, would allow for the elevations of those fields to start to come up because of the subsidence reversal that would occur there. So potentially, and we'd have to investigate this, but potentially that same process could occur here on some of those sloughs. So yeah, that's kind of the basic principles of it. Like I said, it's new. We need to investigate a little bit further. Yeah. Does that help?
I mean, the main question from a hydraulic standpoint, if they're less subsided and they're higher elevation.
Yeah,
Without a conduit.
so they're higher, but then you basically could filter water off of it because basically like if you think about how they form, physics of like particles moving through the watershed, right? So like those heavier particles are gonna fall out earlier, right? So you get these natural levees. So like I started keying in on that when I was looking at that. But then it's like, okay, well, you can have water flood out over the top. Managed wise,
So I get it, it's what the concept. Now,
sort of, yeah. So. Yeah, and then so anyways, thanks.
All right, Laura, any other question?
Yeah, I was just curious for the nursery question, like maybe if we could get like a little more background. Like I'm wondering if the intent was like commercial, like native plant nursery, or if there's some sort of need in the Delta for the access to native plants for restoration purposes, such that we could have like an area that you could harvest from. So I just was wondering if there was more background about it.
So there is in the chat, it was from Alexander Broom. Antioch recently began pursuing the first native plant mandate in the county. And so the demand for native plants is sure to increase, and so I think that it's probably going to be more of a trend to mandate native planting. So as it increases, plus if we do more of these projects, as you're hoping 50,000 acres, the demand for native plants will increase. So I think that's where the question is coming from.
I could possibly speak to this.
Yeah, go for it.
So with tules, oftentimes salvaging, small pockets of tules and placing them in restoration sites, they spread really quickly or whatever. I could definitely see like the tule marsh that's being restored, potentially being source material for other marsh restoration projects, because they've spread laterally, 3 to 6 feet in a year if there's an open space. And so you take out small areas, they rapidly fill that gap. And so it's really not an impact to the marsh. Also, there's been talk about how these floating peat islands are potentially really may become really important for delta restoration. And so those could potentially be harvested from some of these managed wetlands fields where the peats are deep and we have this marsh vegetation growing on them. Furthermore, like collection of cuttings of willows and cottonwoods and things like that, that is a really useful way to restore landscapes. And so I feel like any areas that are available for people to go in and collect cutting material, dormant hardwood cuttings, is also kind of a nursery. But in terms of like actually having a plant nursery with container plants or whatever, I don't think that's in the vision for Webb, maybe partly because of the ferry access, but other reasons too. But I think there's a lot of potential for the restored habitats to provide propagule sources, either actively harvested or just as seed dispersal for other local restoration projects.
I'd like to add to that as well. Go ahead.
In a previous life, I was executive director of Friends of Marsh Creek Watershed, doing a lot of riparian habitat restoration. And we pursued the idea of having a native plant nursery. And it's not just a, quick thing. It's a long-term kind of thing. And when you're talking about the type of plants that are needed, say on the island versus say the sand dunes in Antioch versus the creeks along, Marsh Creek, those are all different plants that need to be harvested in different places. So, and plus, I think you said it a couple times, there's a ferry there. So, so I would just say it might not be Webb Tract that would be the best place, but one of the other islands to do plant for the islands for native plants. I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, but that's my take on it.
I'll say two things also about build a bridge.
Use it as a bridge.
Oh, I will say two other things. One, that Metropolitan does on the 4 different islands, and this project that we presented to on Webb Tract is really an offshoot of a project that was started on Bolden Island. It was a large planning process that brought a large number of groups together to look at what are the opportunities that could present themselves. So really just a big paper and study on what is possible on these islands. And so that is, we do have, well, Webb Tract was chosen for this grant because of the unique nature of it. There's also the other islands that we're able to do that on, and we're able to explore some of those opportunities. But even on Webb Tract, one of the I was talking with Austin and Don about the ecocultural group, and one of the things that I'm learning as I go. This is just a really an amazing opportunity for me to be able to learn as well. But they were bringing the idea in of this of agriculture, tribal agriculture in the region, which is harvesting, but and I was in my naivete, I'm thinking that there isn't a lot of agriculture in the tribal communities, but there is. It's just on a different scale than what we're used to. And so there may be some opportunities there for us to do something on the smaller scale, where they come in and they're able to take small regions and cultivate those things that they can use, and then prepare that land for the next year for the cultivation and the next year. And it's not on the market that we look at it, on that scale that we look at it, is selling a large market crop on the market, but it's something in a smaller level. And so it's something that we're looking at as part of the ecocultural group as well, or what are some of those smaller opportunities that could present themselves. And there's the berry. No.
Great. Any more questions? We have another 12 minutes.
I had a question before, and I didn't say this. I meant to say this earlier on in the presentation. She's on the survey. The survey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There is a follow-up survey that I'll launch in just a second here, but I do want to say that it was a question that was asked in the room prior to the start of the presentation, and that was whether or not this will be used for the Delta Conveyance Project for mitigation. And I want to be really, really clear that Webb Tract and the grant that we have is not going to be used for the Delta Conveyance Project in any way, shape, or form. So I want to say that, and for the people online, I want to say that for the people in the room. It was a question that was asked ahead of time. It was also specified in the grant itself. It's written into the grant that it will not be used for mitigation for the Delta Conveyance Project. Which, really gives us a good flexibility with this island to be able to do some really neat stuff with that. So I wanted to say that. Okay, and I'm going to start. We have a page 2 of the survey that we would like you to flip over for those that are in the room and fill out. And then I'm going to start the other one. I get my glasses.
So please take the time to do that before you leave. And we still have a couple minutes here while people are filling things out. So if anybody has any last minute burning questions, we're happy to take them. And if not, thank you for coming out today. I think we're all really pleased with the turnout, both online and in the room, and really appreciate everyone engaging with this project. As Melinda said, just really these voices and the thoughts and the things that we're not thinking about are what's going to make this a really good project. So thank you for taking the time to be here today to share your ideas and your thoughts. And feel free to always follow up if you have other things that come up for you as the process goes on. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for coming to the Delta.
Okay. I'll leave this open online for a few minutes, but thank you all for.
All right,
for
thank
attending.
you. Have a great day. Have the rest of your day.
Question on that? Pretty interesting. You get that.